Dr. John Scott. I want you to welcome once again to the Influent Network and for my podcast, Beyond the White Coat. We have a great special guest today. We have Carlos Munguias. He is the president of Amegy Bank. And if you'll notice my shirt, it says UNT. Well, he is the vice chair of the UNT Board of Regents. And so I welcome Mr. Carlos Munguias. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. So, John, what can I tell you? I know you want to find out everything you can about my background and my what I know about doctors. What can I start with?
Here's how we're going to start this. All right. For all of you that are residents and medical students, you're going to be bombarded with, over your lifetime, of people that want you to invest all your hard-earned money. And the problem is we don't get that kind of training in med school residencies, so we have to do it on our own. So I asked Carlos to come on today and kind of give us a brief background of investing in finances and banking and all that. But Carlos, if you wouldn't mind, please tell me, start with your background, where you're from, how you got into the banking industry, and then we'll go from there. Take it away, Carlos.
Okay. So I'm Carlos Munguia, and I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I studied at University of North Texas, graduated from there with a degree in finance, and then I did graduate school at SMU, also in banking, and been a Dallas resident my whole life. And so we're in a major market here for financial institutions. It's the number 2 market in the country, behind New York. We passed Los Angeles. And so it's a very frothy market. But my my side of it is, for reason that I got into banking was I really enjoyed the analytical side of schooling, but then I also liked the people side. And as I was growing up, I noticed that those two both fit in nicely in banking. And our business is very competitive. And so that's another twist to it that I grew up playing sports, and it was kind of fun to shift over to being competitive with your mind. And so we do that every day. And the nature of my business is to try to get more market share by working with more business owners. So John, let me keep going. I'll just talk about, John had asked me to talk about students and residents and some of the just things to think about when you're in that stage of your career. And so the one thing that I'll tell you first off the bat is it's never too early to learn how to budget. And this isn't exclusive to the medical profession. It's really to almost everybody, that we don't teach that in schools. And that's one of the fundamentals, that you got to figure out how to live within your means. And so there are plenty of places you can access a budget online to kind of help you get started. But the whole premise is just to figure out a way to figure out what you really need versus what you want, and what your income is and how you're going to make it all work without going into debt. And that philosophy is something that will put you in a great position ultimately, if you're mindful of not spending more than what you're bringing in. And there are ways to use debt, but you want to be very respectful of it. So the other thing I tell you is just early on, it's always great to start saving money. And doesn't matter what the increment is, but the earlier you start, the better it'll benefit you ultimately, because time creates more of a return, and you can double your money typically in 8 years. And there's just a lot of things that you can do to build yourself a nest egg early on. So as you become a doctor and you start having opportunities to save and to spend and all that, you want to think about, I guess, Scott, I think, John, I think they call them 403Bs. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, it's kind of like your 401k.
Right.
And the Roth IRAs, all that kind of stuff are great ways just to get started. And what you hope to do ultimately is get to where you've got a year first of a year of your living expense saved up, and then go for getting 2 years of it, and so on and so on. And then as you're graduating from school, and you've got your student debt, you start whittling away at that over time, but you're almost doing it at the same time and trying to get some money put aside so you have some liquidity built up for a rainy day or for an opportunity. And John was referencing, you're going to have investment opportunities. And what I tell you on that front, and I've talked to many folks that are more mature doctors that have had opportunities presented to them. And if there's ever a place that they falter is not having enough business savvy or financial savvy to really understand what they're investing in. And so I'd urge you to figure out ways to complete some finance classes, some business classes, so that you get your arms around how to run a business, but also how to analyze a business, because you will have an opportunity. They will definitely come your way, and you just want to make sure you play it smart in where you invest. And it's great to invest, and it's great to try to create another income source beyond your salary that you'll get as a doctor and the distributions and all that. But if there is a way to have kind of a side hustle going, that's smart. But you got to be very thoughtful about what you get into so that you're, something that makes sense, that's legal, that's predictable, and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's just talking about that pretty quick, but to me, it's, if you're in the position where you can start to invest, go for it. Putting in cash equity on an investment is a smart way to do it. And over time, you can use debt, but you always want to be able to get out from under it some way. And by that, I mean, if you're going to invest in some real estate, that's fine if you use debt. Put enough equity into it in case rates jump up the way they just did, and you're not, pacing around trying to figure out how you're going to meet that next payment. If you have enough equity in it, it's not really going to impact you that bad. But you want to make sure that you're always putting in enough equity in any kind of investment that you make. But if you get into like a real estate deal, there's always a way to get out. And whenever you're making any kind of investment, you always need to think about, how am I going to get out if something doesn't work? And by that, I mean, what can you sell that you're connected to in that investment that would get you out of the investment? Sometimes you go into it and there isn't a second way out, but you got to be comfortable at losing whatever you've invested and feel good about that. That's not going to put you in a precarious position ultimately. The other things that I've seen in thinking about a doctor and the way they conduct their business, you always want to make sure you're not shy about getting insurance coverage, and play smart and make sure you've got your disability and malpractice all pinned down. And it's never too early to think along those lines, and every other kind of insurance that makes sense for whatever your business is, whatever your practice is focusing on. So I'd urge you on that. If you've got liquidity saved up, you've got a modest amount of debt, you're insured, then you ought to be in pretty good shape if something happens to you. You've got your disability insurance, something happens, you're in you have an injury or whatever, maybe that'll take care of your cash flow needs and, sustain you until you can get back to, whatever you've got to work through to be back to normal. As far as other things to think about, when I mentioned debt is not evil. You just need to respect it. And so you want to get in and out. So if you make an investment and there's debt associated with it, and you start to kind of the investment or the opportunity starts to hit its stride and it's throwing off cash and it's creating distributions for you, first thing I would do was get rid of that debt, because that stuff will not continue forever. If you think about what you see with our professional athletes and how they're making a nice sum of money, well, that doesn't last forever. If you're a running back, you might get 8 or 10 years in the NFL, but some of the folks that are out there are thinking it's going to go on forever, and they create the overhead and they do all that, and then all of a sudden it stops. and then they have nothing to really fall back on. So you definitely want to be mindful of things can change. COVID could happen, all the stuff that can happen. Interest rates can jump up, and you just want to be prepared by managing your debt, having liquidity. And one other thing that Dr. Scott and I talked about earlier today was just, your credit score. And that's something that you should really protect. And you should get a report periodically. I subscribe to a service that tells me monthly what my score is. I would urge you to do that, because when you have an opportunity to make an investment in something else, you're going to buy a house, you're going to buy a bigger house, you're going to help somebody else out with something, they're going to pull your credit, and your credit score is just you. And it's your name. And so you really want to protect what's going on there and keep up with it. And with everything that's going on with fraud, you want to make sure that you're keeping up with it for that very reason also, because you got to make sure that somebody hasn't grabbed your information and is leveraging, your profile to borrow money or whatever. So, anyway, that's something to think about. John, do you want to have something?
How would you go back to what you just did? The people taking your identity and leverage your profile. What do you recommend how to protect that?
What I do, and it's available to everybody, is I subscribe to a service. So it's not that expensive. You might spend, $10-15 a month, and you're connected to a service that will give you alerts that somebody has your phone number. They have some source of information that might, make it easier for them to leverage your profile to get access to credit. And that's kind of what you're really concerned about. So American Express offers a service for that. Most of the credit card companies have some kind of service that you can latch onto. And then all of the credit service, the bureaus, they've got ways that you can reach out to them and they can give you advice as to who would be a good resource for that. But it's out there, and I think it's definitely worth the money to have that. Because I get notices all the time that, hey, I've noticed a change in your score. And sometimes that score will be that it went up. So, and just as we're talking, since this is free, an 800 score and above is a very good score. 700, 750 and up, that's good. That's probably like a B. And below that, you start getting into B minus and C. And so you always want to protect a lot of folks. You got to keep in mind that you're going to have student debt, and that affects your credit score. And if you think about the size of that student debt relative to your income, it's going to skew it. So you want to make sure everything else is in really good shape as you go forward. John, hey, Dr. Scott, is there anything else that I'm talking fast, I'm covering a lot of ground, but is there anything?
Well, you are. No, I want to break a few of these things down. You've done great, Carlos. I really appreciate it. A couple of things. One, if you didn't know that your disability insurance that you take out for your whole career ends at age 65. So if you're still practicing after 65, you better have everything paid off. The other thing is that I do recommend life insurance, term, or if you want whole life, whatever, that's kind of up to you. 3 is always try and live in that environment like you want to pay off your home, you want to pay off your cars. You don't want to be what is known as house poor in your career. We all do it. There were my med school buddies that were taking out extra loans for cars, and the interest rate is huge, and they didn't think about it today because they had to pay for it tomorrow. There's ways you can get your loans paid for. You can join the military, or you can go to a small town or Indian reservation. There's ways to do that, but that means you have a contract and you'll be with them for 8 or 10 years. So could be a career thing in your life. The other thing I wanted to have Carlos, the bank president, on is to kind of keep you out of taking bad mistakes. And Carlos, if you wouldn't mind, kind of give us a little deal about investing, about what's good, what's bad, because really, you don't really know when you get the cold call over the phone and people sound good. I've also heard like 1 in 10 investments, if you get one a good one, then it's great. The other 9 is just part of life. The other thing Carlos had mentioned earlier was when you do an investment, treat it like Las Vegas money. Have it where you don't have to have it if it fails. If it does great, then great. But if it fails, you haven't lost your home, your house, your car, whatever it is. I'll turn it back over to you, Carlos.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of this all ties in together, but I mentioned earlier about business savvy and financial savvy. It's never too early to start figuring that out. There's so many ways to access that kind of schooling, and it doesn't have to take that long. Like they say, you can Google, and you can now chat GPT and do all this stuff to figure out that, if somebody presents you with an investment, you can Google or chat GPT to figure out what's the good and the bad of whatever that investment is. That information's out there now. But as far as the basics, you really want to understand business and finance before you start putting money in deals. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, when will this turn into where it's giving me a distribution? When will it start making money? And then whatever they tell you, you want to keep checking it out until you feel comfortable that seems real. And you can't just, you shouldn't invest in something you don't understand. And that's that simple. You should, everybody's got their resources, people that they can talk to. I'd use your network, I'd Google, and then I would rely on myself, just on my own judgment as to, does that really make sense? And if it doesn't, if there's nothing wrong, say, hey, that's just not for me. And everybody's got their own appetite for risk. And as John was saying, you're either playing with house money and it's not going to hurt you if you lose it. But if you're beyond that, you really need to understand what you're getting into. And if you do that, how are you going to get out? Okay. If it starts to turn and the market goes in a different direction and that this thing's not going to work, what could you recover in a liquidation event? So it's a lot about, understanding it up front and then doing your due diligence to know that something really makes sense. And then I'd be careful as to how many of those I have at play at the same time. And there's degrees of risk, and you could, be smart about, hey, here's one that's a very safe bet. Here's one that's middle of the road, and here's one that's more of a stretch, and I'm not going to put as much money into that. So it's just common sense but I think a lot of times when people start to really create some liquidity, they're a little more comfortable with risk, and you just need to, remember that you could lose whatever that investment is. And if you're comfortable with that, then go for it. But otherwise, you want to be very diligent about what it is you're getting into and make sure you check it out.
Very true. Would you recommend a medical student resident when they finish to get an MBA? Is that something you would recommend? By the way, I have one. So what?
Yeah. MBA would be great, but it doesn't have to be an MBA. You could be an undergraduate degree in business and finance, and you'd be fine. Just depend. Both of those are great. MBA would be perfect. You could do that. That'd be great. But and if it's not that, if that's not available, you have a resource, an advisor that you can go to and really listen to them. And there's somebody that maybe has their CFP or the MBA or whatever, and you bounce ideas off of them, and maybe you're paying for it, but so what? It's worth it in the long run so that you don't make a big mistake.
In the future episodes, I'm probably going to have a stockbroker or something of that nature, Charles Schwab or Merrill Lynch, on to talk about basis points. And we just had our quarterly retreat, and we have Goldman Sachs that we're invested in. And he was talking about one of the regents asking, what are we paying? What's our cost? He said 25 basis points. And UNT has invested a lot of money. And so he said, if you invest another tier, it's going to drop further. The other thing I learned the hard way was mutual funds. Mutual funds are not like stocks. You can put a stop loss on the stock, and if it drops, the market drop dramatically in one day, it's going to stop out and you're safe. Usually the safe level is 10% below the stock price. But with mutual funds, you could drop it. Whatever the market dropped, 40%, 50%, something like that. I lost one day 40%. And in the I had the CFP, and he says, John, don't worry, it'll come back up. But I want you guys to understand one thing. What you make today is not for a day. It's for when you're 75 or when you're 80, when you're not working anymore. And there will become that day in your life, early or late, that you can't work. So you have to save, just like Carlos been saying, you have to put by money, safe money, risky money, aggressive money. And they also ask you, what do you want? You want aggressive growth? You want this? And so you got a lot of information going after you, and you think you know everything. I did too. I studied everything, medical school, college, medical school, residency, fellowships. I thought I knew everything. No, you don't, because you know nothing about business. So that's one of the things is I recommend you can get it online, an MBA, but it teaches you how to think. If anything, teaches you how to read a table, a chart graph, any of these things. So I really highly recommend that stuff. Carlos, minutes left. Would you like to summarize, say anything else? I really appreciate you.
Yeah. No, I just say, appreciate the value of diversification. Okay. So you're going to go into the medical profession. You'll end up being paid well, but diversify yourself so that you're creating wealth in another area. To do that, you got to have some business savvy and financial savvy. But if you don't have it yet, lean on some outside resources to help you get there, and ask the questions and just make sure it makes sense to you. But if you get with the right advisors, you can still make it happen. And I urge you the earlier, the better. Once you build up your cash, let's say you got your student debt and that's what you had, that's it. Start building your cash so you can get 1 year's worth of your living and then go to 2 years worth, and you're still paying on your school debt. And then maybe you start making a little more money. Then you have a chance. Can I put some money in an investment? And is it going to throw off any cash? And if it didn't, fine. You're just going to be investing for a while. But, try to, pick what you really want to do, because you don't want to jump in and take on a lot of debt and have an investment that doesn't create the cash, and just everything gets tight and you're cash poor. You just want to avoid that. But just, again, you can be thoughtful about not trying to do everything at once. Lean on your resources for thought and analysis, and be respectful of credit protect your credit score, be respectful of debt. And again, like I said before, debt is not a bad thing, but you just want to be respectful and get out of it the sooner the better, so that if things change, which we've all seen how things change, that you're in a safe place. But that's all I'd say. It's a lot of it's very predictable, and what you've heard your parents say to you, but you just want to not live beyond your means. And if you do decide to take a step, take a calculated risk in doing it, and then get back in line and go on down the road, and maybe you do another one and then get back in line. It just takes some self-discipline.
Again, thank you, Carlos, for being here. He is the president of Amegy Bank. I can't thank you enough. He's very sharp. He runs the finance committee on UNT Board of Regents. He's run audit committees. So I've learned a lot through him, as well as my other regent members. There's 9 of us, and 8 are business people, and 1 is a doctor, and that's the one that knows the least. So I really appreciate their kindness in teaching me so much. But I would like to have him back again, and in the future, I'd love to have it where we can have an audience that can send in questions for him to answer. But again, I want to thank Carlos Munguias, president of Amegy Bank, vice chair of UNT Board of Regents, for being our guest tonight. And thank you again. And I'm going to say goodnight, and beyond the white coat, I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you all.